Solving with square roots. Now, the reason we went through radical expressions is because we need to review how square roots work to solve quadratic equations. So we're going to solve these using square roots. So, for example, if x squared equals 9, what you're going to do with inverse operations is you take the square root to cancel out the power of 2. When you cancel out the power of 2, you're left with x. Now, the rule is, with inverse operations, whatever you do to one side, you do to the other, which means you would get, the answer is plus or minus the square root of 9. Now, the reason I wrote it this way is because some numbers do not have square roots. You would leave your answer this way. But this actually has a square root. The final answer is plus or minus 3. So what does this mean? What this means is, if you plug in a 3 and you square it, you get 9. 3 times 3 is 9. But if you plug in negative 3 squared, negative 3 times negative 3 is also 9, which means this has two answers, a positive and a negative. So the fastest way to do that is to identify plus minus to represent those two answers. And that's it. That's how you solve square roots. Now, the problem here is there's a bunch of numbers in the way. So we're going to use inverse operations to get rid of them. So like the opposite of negative 6 plus 6, you'll get 7x squared equals 21. Okay. Now I get rid of that 7. That 7 is multiplying, so we're going to divide by 7. We're going to get x squared equals 3. And here we get the same kind of problem. How do you get rid of the power of 2? How do you get rid of the square? With the square root. That'll cancel out the 2. And your answer for this will be x equals plus or minus the square root of 3. The reason this stays inside of the box and the 9 didn't is because 3 doesn't have a square root. So guys, this is a perfectly acceptable answer. Then you can leave it like that. Okay? Let's practice a couple more. All right. Here, we'll get rid of the 19. Minus 19 on both sides. Get 4x squared equals negative 12. Divide both sides by 4. X squared equals negative 3. Take a square root to get rid of the 2. Take the square root of this side, and there's a problem. There's a problem. If you have to take the square root of a negative, you cannot. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. This is a no solution. You can't do that. Because what you're saying is, if you take the square root of something, it's the same number twice. So a positive times a positive would not make negative. And if you have a negative and a negative, that would not make a negative. The only way to get a negative number is with a negative and a positive. But then that is not a square. You're not doing the same number. You're not squaring the same number twice. You're using two different numbers. So instead of doing all this, we just write down no solution. Because you're not allowed to take the square root of a negative number. Okay? Now, here, get rid of the 4. Minus 4. Divide by 3. Take the square root. There's no plus or minus because 0 is the only number that is not a positive or a negative. It's just 0. So this is the answer. X equals 0. Not no solution. This is no solution. This is just 0. One answer. So again, you can have two answers, you can have one answer, or you can have no solution, no answer at all. Okay? So just be aware of that. Follow inverse operations and be careful. The last thing I want to show you is something called the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, the Pythagorean theorem is basically a rule of right triangles. So the triangle has to have 90 degrees in one corner. Okay, the other degrees don't matter. But if you have a right triangle, they discovered, or the Greeks discovered, that if you take these two terms, square them, and add them up, you get c squared. And this worked for every triangle that had a 90-degree angle. So It's basically an equation now. It works 100% of the time. So that's what we're going to do. Here's a right triangle. Now, if you notice, the parts that are next to 90 degrees, next to this box, are A and B. So we're going to say this is A and this is B. The longest side is C. So just fill it out correctly. If you don't fill it out correctly, you're going to have some issues. So we would do 4x squared plus 5 squared equals 11 squared. That's how you would do it. That's how you would set it up. You square 4x times 4x is 16x squared. 5 times 5 is 25. And 11 times 11 is 121. Okay, we're going to subtract 121 from 25. So we're going to subtract 25 from both sides. You'd get 16x squared equals, let me use my calculator real quick just so I make sure I don't get this wrong. That is, wow, 96. Okay. We're going to divide 96 by 16. We get x squared equals 6. Again, that's not your answer because you have to get rid of the square. Take the square root of both sides. The answer for x is square root of 6. Wait, where's the plus or minus? The reason I'm not going to put a minus here, when we're doing measurements of a shape, of a real shape, if this was a real triangle, there would not be a negative side. It wouldn't make sense. So what this means is this triangle is 5, 4 times the square root of 6, and 11. X is the square root of 6. And that's it. That's the answer. X is the square root of 6.